Okay, so we should be live now. Welcome. Good evening to another Satsuki live stream from me, Peter Warren. Sorry, Emma Bonsai. We've been doing these live streams now for as long as lockdown's kind of been going on for. So thank you all for tuning in again. We started off with a slightly different logo to begin with there, and I just want to show that again because this is a picture from a great friend, supporter of us here, Daniel Lake, who should be tuning in, maybe under the Rowena Edwards' name. But I do workshops with him up at Willowbog, and he's a phenomenal artist and sneaker aficionado or trainer. And these are a pair of Air Jordan Mark 5s, which are without a doubt my favourite trainer ever. I had a pair when I was younger, and these have a lot of meaning to me. And so he painted a pair as thanks for doing these live streams and sort of keeping him interested in bonsai and stuff like that. So they wrote the picture arrived today, which was great. And so thank you very much, Daniel. Please check him out on Instagram and stuff. He's a tattoo artist, so if you're up in Newcastle and you want some ink doing, speak to him. So thanks very much, Daniel. So yes, these live streams are for free. However, we are asked kind of like people donating either cash or kind or something to kind of to say thank you for doing this and to keep it going. So I'll put a link up later. There is a link in the text and things there. So we had a bit of trouble with the last stream, the donor only sort of Q&A stream, with some sound and pictures and stuff. I think we're doing okay now. Sound sync out. Is it badly out? Because it wasn't out when I was doing it earlier. How badly is it out? Is the question. Is it out for everybody, or is it just to Steve? Because I don't know. Let me just see if I can delay it a little bit. Fine here, 1 second out. Okay, I'll put a delay on it. Sound is good. Sound is good. Okay, Steve, it might be you. Right, so I'll continue. If it's really bad, let me know, and I'll fix it. But anyway, right. So yes, we're going to go talk about 1 second. Okay, so some people it's in sync, other people it's not. So perhaps those people are having difficulties with it. Turn it off and come back again. So right, back on track. So azaleas, yes. So we good. This stream and the previous stream, basically they're all kind of like building on each other, and there is an assumption that you've seen the other streams and you've watched the introduction stream, and we've progressed through them. So if you're just kind of watching this on catch up, go and watch the other streams, because there's assumptions that are made here, and one of those assumptions is that the health of the tree is of absolute paramount importance, and we will look at some examples of very sort of sick trees, but the aggressive kind of pruning of one of the trees that we're going to look at is sort of based upon the fact that it's super healthy. Okay, with azaleas, the health of the tree, the horticultural aspect is of the absolute kind of importance. So making sure that it's healthy, making sure that the roots are fine, and all of those things is of the absolute kind of like fundamental importance before you go in and do these kind of like really hard pruning techniques. So we looked at last time a sort of semi-styled piece of material, so the Hanabin, okay, the sort of semi-cascade Hanabin, which I should have brought in. And that was something which had kind of like that sort of bare bone structure in there, and we just kind of pruned back some long vigorous shoots to kind of maintain that shape. Now what we're going to look at is an example of something that is a lot more kind of out shape, really kind of like big and bushy, and we're sort of really going in and resetting the structure. Okay, so it's quite an interesting tray. It's something that I purchased in Japan recently, and it actually turned out a lot better than I was expecting. So I was quite happy with it, and I'll try and fix the syncing issues whilst this video is on. So anybody has any questions, put them in the chat with the preface of question, please. Okay. Here we have freshly imported Azalea, came in this year. This is a root over rock style, which is a not massively common variety, but it has a variety of red to white and all sorts of in-between flowers. What's interesting about this one is the root over rock style. Okay, it's something which we don't tend to see. Very much in, with azaleas. This is due to the fact that they don't like being on rocks, and so that deep pot, that massive amount of foliage on the top is quite an essential part of that. The reason why they don't like being on rocks is they don't like the bark, the trunk, to get too hot, and so only certain varieties will withstand it. However, in the UK, it's unlikely to get so hot as to create any problems for the tree. So what we're going to do is going to go in and just have a look at exposing the inner structure, because we can't see what's going on in there at all. Okay, which side is the front? I don't know. And so we're just going to go in and cut to expose the structure. The only area of concern really is the apex. It's had something cut off there, and so this 1 weak branch that we have here, that will be left uncut, so I have to be very careful not to go in and just cut that as a matter of course. So I'm going to use some very aggressive hedge trimmers. Spring-loaded hedge trimmers. This is an essential Azalea tool. Okay, it looks very brutal. It is. Essentially what we're doing is just going to cut back to a rough shape of where I think the tree is. It doesn't matter if we're cutting back and there's nothing on. The branch, it's going to bud up profusely. Talking about flower distributions and the colours of flowers, at the moment it seems to have a very good distribution, except for this one branch here at the back, or the front, I don't know, which does appear to be entirely red, although this flower that's coming out here is white, so it's not 100%. We've got quite a lot of red on that one side. You can tell the colours of the flowers from the colour of the flower bud, particularly at the tip. See that red dot there, it's going to be a red-ish flower. No surprising, seeing as it's right next to it. And obviously that one clearly is opening up now. So there's a lot of redness on that one branch. However, due to the structural nature of the tree and the fact that it's kind of best feature is the rock, we could be looking at an azalea that we are focusing more on the structure and its year-round beauty as opposed to its flowering. Obviously it's great to combine the two if we can, but if we want to focus on the structure, then it doesn't really matter about the flowering distribution and such like as much. So I'm just going to tear off all the growth that's underneath the branches from the crotches of branches that's growing downwards. Trying to tear them off rather than cut them. So now I can start to see a little bit of the kind of major branching structure in there. Just let me clean it out a little. So now, having chopped the tree back a little, and we can see inside, the structures become apparent, and we've got one or two issues that need to be resolved. One of them being the straightness of this branch here, and also the kind of the vertical nature and straightness of this apical branch. Now this side is looking like the best contender for the front in terms of the branch arrangements. The rock face as well is very interesting from this side, and the way in which the roots clasp on there. Round here, the rock is more interesting, but the roots are very poor. The tree is kind of like set back from this side, and we have this very thick and powerful branch sort of coming out here. So looking at it from the side. You can see that thick branch there, and you can see the way it sort of just tends to lean towards this side. So I'm thinking that this side is going to be the front, basically. We need to look at the apex, we need to look at this branch, and then think about weakening that strong branch at the back, and then moving on to the finer details. So one possibility to look at in terms of dealing with the kind of like the horizontal and straight nature of this branch, because one of the issues is not the fact that it's just straight, is that it is almost parallel to the pot line. Okay, so we can live with the straightness to a certain extent if we can get that off at a different angle, either upwards or downwards, but the parallel nature to the trunk makes it really sort of stick out. The parallel nature to the pot, sorry, makes it stick out. In addition to that, we have the sort of the straight vertical nature of this apex branch trunk line, which has been sort of cut off. And so there are a couple of different possibilities. There is an alternative trunk line coming up into here, which helps to take the tree very much off in a dynamic way. Alternatively, we could look at an angle change in order to take this off the horizontal and that off the vertical. Maybe even a bit more. Okay, so changing the angle quite dramatically like this makes the tree a lot more dynamic. Okay, and then potentially coming in and looking at it from there. So this is looking like a good option, a good possibility. Definitely in terms of keeping the existing apical trunk line. This branch underneath here is still a little bit undesirable. It could be, we could get a little bit of bending from this point here. However, the base of the branch is never going to bend, and a lot of you might be thinking that, well, we'll just cut it off. However, due to the nature of azaleas, if we come in and cut this branch off without any shoots below, then there is a very good possibility that we will end up with a massive amount of kind of dieback off the roots. So we're all going down there. This tree's key feature is those roots clasping onto the rock. to lose those roots just to get rid of the straightness of this branch, I think would be a negative outcome. And so what we'll look at doing is we'll cut this one back as hard as we possibly can, and then look for new shoots to develop out. They're going to be these big thick sucker shoots, because this tree is absolutely full of energy. And then we can look at start to rebuild that branch again, maybe coming in and cutting it back to a length like this, then growing it out again. So what we've got in here, there's one branch that's going off to that side. So we're going to keep that. So we'll come in, just cut through there at an angle. Now looking at the sucker shoots, I'm going to keep these main branches. We have one sucker shoot that's in the middle there, and these sucker shoots are just really vigorous and they're growing out. So I've got to try and get in there and remove it. Yep, so this one is kind of growing off at a right angle to the branch. We want things to flow down and out. So that one can come off as well. This big heavy branch that we have at the back here, I want to remove this because of its thickness. Because of its seemingly very red nature. I want to remove it all. However, due to the fact that there's nothing beneath it, it's going to be very difficult to remove it and not cause any dieback. So we're going to cut this one back as hard as we possibly can. Just do it short. Just leave a stub to begin with. There's some branches there which have red flowers on them. This is a shoot coming from somewhere else. That'll come off. There we go. You can see the proximity between these two branches here. This would be a much more kind of interesting back branch as it's flowing sort of down and out, as opposed to this one. So we'll cut this one back a little bit further. Keep these two on there to keep that live vein alive. It's going to send out lots of new shoots from here, so we'll maybe let those grow out a little bit, see how it responds, see what colour of the flowers are next year, and then make a decision as to whether or not we come in and are able to cut it off entirely, or whether we just keep a tiny little stubby branch there just to keep the integrity of these live veins and the roots intact. So after that, I'll just clean up the wound with the scalpel, and then seal it with wound sealant. So looking at this branch here, we have this one big strong sucker shoot which is coming out here, super vigorous, and these older branches that are coming out on that side. What we're doing with this tree is we're resetting it all to the youthful branches. So what we'll do is we'll come in and we'll cut at an angle there, and what that will also do is help to stimulate new growth coming from back in. You can see previously there's been lots of branches removed from there. Right, it's a very vigorous branch this, so it'll have no problem in getting back buds to form. Now what you see, because of that angle that we cut the branch at, it's now going to sort of come down and flow into that branch as it grows and thickens up. So by defining the angle of the cut, we were able to really sculpt that branch. Now azaleas aren't going to heal really well, like incredibly well, and so there may be a little bit of dieback on the top here. We may need to do a little bit more work on this in the future, but over time that's going to change the movement in this section here. So it's going to be thickening up on the bottom, and it's going to give it a little bit of natural change of direction and taper as well. So we're going to do a similar thing here. We're going to look to try and take it down into this line, okay, because we're looking at this kind of like semi-cascading off the side of a mountain type of image rather than it going upwards. And we have this big thick lump at the end of the branch as well.
But the difference with this one, on the other side we have shoots as well, which we're going to try and keep, so it's going to be difficult for us to get in there. Okay, so I may have to do 2 cuts and meet in the middle. It's bloody difficult to do with the camera in the way. Let me just move the camera. And so what we did, 1 cut from one side, another from the other, and then we were able to sort of take it out in that V shape. So we just need to clean up on this side, so we don't want that upward growing shoot.
Ah, bastard, I pressed the wrong button. It was almost the end of the video there anyway. So the important things to kind of note there, and we should be okay on the video and the sound now, so please do let me know if anybody is having further issues with it. Then it would be you. The upload to YouTube is okay, but often it's the download to you, so we should be okay now. Right, but the important facts to kind of to sort of take from that video is that a lot of those techniques and a lot of the concepts that we were just sort of talking about there are very much applicable to other species as well. In particularly the kind of like the thinking about the integrity of the live vein and how the removal of large branches is going to affect the live vein sort of directly underneath it. For maples, for a lot of the deciduous trees, for taxus, for junipers, this is all very kind of like an important point. So that concept there can be translocated and taken to different species and different things like that where necessary. With azaleas, it's much more a case of you're going to get some severe dieback. But say for example with junipers, it could be the case where you're actually looking to try and maintain a live vein on the front of the tree for aesthetic value, and then needing to sort of keep some branches and keep something part of the design so that a live vein will remain alive. So yes, we're talking about azaleas, but we're also talking about a lot of other species. And the other thing to note, and I didn't really sort of talk about it too much there, is the use of a saw. Now a very fine bladed, this one's actually bent through excessive use. Saw is a very important tool for anybody who's doing deciduous work in particular. And the reason why I like to use it as opposed to using sort of branch cutters or the sort of concave cutters such as this is the crushing nature of the concave cutters as it's going through a branch. And so I don't know if you've ever noticed, but when you come to cut through, it kind of crushes and leaves a and just sort of forces its way through the tissues there. And on the tree side of it, so the bit that remains on the tree, that kind of live vein, you know, the cambium layers, the wood there, can be seriously affected by that. And azaleas in particular they can sort of split quite easily when you go in and try and cut through. So using a very sharp saw, going through and cutting, also not only does it give you the ability to cut at the absolute sort of desired angle that you want and to go in and make some very interesting V cuts and things like that, but it also makes sure that that sort of cut through is smooth, clean, and doesn't cause any sort of damage on the remaining side. Okay, so very important kind of like tool to kind of.
Here we have freshly imported azalea.
A very important tool to kind of get to grips with. My mouse finger's a little bit on the sensitive side today, so I highly recommend sort of getting one and learning how to use it properly. Obviously, afterwards, as you saw, there was cleaning up the wound with a sharp knife as well. Okay, so we've gone through and looked at kind of the basic sort of branch structure, those big branches, what can be removed, what can't be removed. That branch on the back couldn't be removed, so we've got to keep some of it. Alright, so now what we're going to look at doing is some of the rest of the branches, and particularly then those sort of secondary branches, the lengths of those, and putting a little bit of wire onto some of those. Okay, hopefully this is going to work.
So as I said, anything that's coming off of this top section there, we're just going to leave that because it was pruning back last year, I would estimate, and it's not really recovered brilliantly, other than we have a multitude of these real strong, vigorous, adventitious sucker-like shoots growing from lower down. So I will wait to see what happens, just allow it to grow. It could be a case of coming in and rebuilding from another branch or taking one of these sucker shoots at the moment, but if we can try and keep the apex in that branch there, then that would be great. We'll give that a little bit of time to see if it will recover. And then what I'll do is I'll just remove all of the flowers from the remaining branches and then look to just shorten some of them back. Can we see that? This branch here, for example, comes out and back up towards the top of the tree here. So what we'll do is we'll look at cutting it back to there, and it's going to continue that downward flow. And then just looking at shortening anything else that's flowing back up the hill and making all of the branches of similar length. That are flowing down, so we're building up that nice, even branching structure that we want. Okay. The only other thing we need to look at is this branch here, which is going kind of back against the flow and also covering up the rock. So what we'll do is we've got a side branch there. We'll cut back to that initially. So that cut has made the wound big, like a massive surface area in there, but it will heal over given energy there, and ultimately it's all going to get covered over anyway. So what we have at the top here, where that trunk line was previously cut back, I don't know the exact reason why it was cut back, but there is a tiny little bit of dieback, and it's really difficult to see, but roughly about here there is a kind of the dividing line between the live section and then the dead section, and that kind of like goes down to like a little bit of a V behind there. Now, I'm not going to go in and start cutting away at that now. There's no real need. What we need is for the apex above it, this branch here, to really sort of begin to grow and strengthen up a lot before we want to worry about going in and doing too much there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this one season to see how it responds, and if it doesn't, then we would potentially be looking at changing the apex to a different branch as previously said. So now we'll just do a little bit of wiring. We're not going to put too much on, just some of the minor branches that are strong, that can be manipulated. Any of these ones that we've kind of like cut back to, and we're expecting them to then grow out, we're not going to touch those for the time being, because we need them to strengthen and to heal that wound. So if they get damaged in any way, we're going to be setting the tree back way more than we would be pushing it forward by giving it some shape. So same rules apply with this species, with this variety, as in the previous video on wiring, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'll just go in and wire it. Now, one tech that we can use with azaleas for being able to kind of bend the branches in an even more kind of extreme way is to use sort of double wire, which is where the coils are spaced in between as opposed to running parallel. What this does is it increases the points of contact between wire and branch. Okay, it looks ugly, but what it will enable us to do is to put a lot more kind of movement in it. And when these branches are really flexible, we can really get in there and try and correct that frog's leg appearance, and also really accentuate that movement a lot without the branch snapping. So this is the finished result. There's a few bits that have been left unwired for reasons of strength and not wishing to damage the branches, in particular the apex here. We've got a bit of a gap at the back here, but what will happen is new shoots will grow up. One of these big strong sucker shoots was laid down from the top there down the back. We will get explosion of growth out here, which we can use to help fill in some of the back. This is going to explode. This is one of those sucker shoots that's been bent down as well. That's going to explode in there, and so this gap will ultimately kind of get filled in a little bit, but we do want to be sort of pushing the tree and the apex just slightly across towards this section rather than out towards us. This lower branch that we have here, it's still straight, it's always going to be straight. All we can hope for is to try and get some foliage to come out on the front and try and hide some of that straightness, just so that we can see the base in there. What we're going to need to do is to allow this to grow out, to strengthen, to help heal this wound, and then through cutting back we'll be able to get some, we'll see an explosion of growth. We've put some excessive movement, exaggerated movement in these branches here. Okay, you see they're all very sort of similar lengths there. So we're going to look at them building up our structure from here. In terms of the planting angle, it's going to be very difficult for us to go much further than this and not run into problems with exposing the roots on this side. So yes, we are going to sort of change that angle, but what we'll end up doing is probably trying to bury on this side a little bit more. So we're going to lose a little bit of the rock and some of the features there. Rather than exposing on this side, we'll be burying on this side a little bit. So we just have to hope that we can find a pot that's going to be suitable for that, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But for now, we've reset the structure and balanced up some of those strong areas and some of those weaker areas. We just have to see how it then responds and make some alternative decisions if areas don't strengthen up. Going forward, what we're going to see is an explosion of growth on the inside, and so we're going to have to definitely look at dealing with those sooner rather than later. So we'll revisit this tree in about a month's time when those buds have formed and started to grow, do some decision making. But other than that, the aftercare is going to be put it somewhere ever so slightly shaded from intense sunlight, because all of this bark has been exposed. We've made some big wounds, desiccation of the live veins, and things could happen. Right, so it'll go underneath the bench for a month, feed and water well, and watch it explode.
Okay, managed to get to the end of the video without spuffing the load. Obviously there's quite a dramatic change with this tree, and it's okay for it to do that with an azalea, because, as I said, it was really very sort of healthy to begin with. There's lots of foliage. I could have gone even further, except for that apex, and just taken every piece of green off, and it still would have come back. Okay, so azaleas, if they're strong and they're healthy, they can withstand that sort of level of big pruning, hard pruning. If you did that to other species, evergreens in particular, you would never ever want to do that. So this is something which is very sort of specific to azaleas. And basically, all the pruning methods and all the pruning sort of concepts there were specifically for styling. There wasn't anything apart from just the non-pruning of that apical branch. There was nothing there where there was a consideration for the health of the tree, and that's the other aspect of kind of pruning of azaleas. So obviously, when we come to prune a tree, there's always there should be sort of two factors that we're considering. One of them is the health of the tree, one of them is the styling of the tree, and we're always trying to balance those two things. Okay, when the health of the tree is just absolutely gangbusters, as in the case of this one, we don't even need to worry about it. We just focus on the styling. Okay, when the health of the tree is sort of seriously deteriorated, then we don't focus on any aspect of styling. We're just thinking about pruning for health. Okay, so you always try to balance those two kind of considerations up. When you've got the health, you can focus on styling. When you haven't, you forget about the styling. Okay, so how do we sort of prune for health, and what are the concepts around sort of pruning for health? We'll cover that in a sort of another video. But what we've got to kind of before we get into that, we'll just sort of show the idea of trying to maintain a shape, the sort of the pruning that we do to sort of maintain a shape. Okay, with a short video about another tree, and then we can kind of move into that because it kind of explains it a little bit better. So. Where's that one there? ISSHO no HARU. This is a very favourite little tree of mine. We've seen this one a couple times. This isn't too long. Okay.
So here we have the ISSHO no HARU. It's repotted this year, so we're not going to let it flower too much. The flowers have already started to finish because they've got wet. They're starting to turn, so we're going to remove those. And then we're not going to go hard on it because it's been repotted. But what we'll do is we'll be cutting back to a first pair of leaves. Sometimes if the spring extensions have been too long, we'll cut them off entirely. But if they're short, then we'll just nip the tip out, cut back to the first pairs of leaves, so that where we've cut will generate a new flush of growth. And we will just keep going through that cycle for a number of years, trying to keep the tree at the same sort of shape, size, looking to remove lignified older branches. So we'll be cutting back to leave 2 leaves, maybe just pinching out the tip, and then from that cut we will then get another flush of growth now. Removal of dirty old leaves on the inside, downward growing shoots, larger leaves that are kind of covering things up. ISSHO no HARU is a large leaf variety, and so those leaves will often get in the way. So this shoot here is long, strong and vigorous, and then it's split into 1, 2, 3. What we're going to do is we're going to come in, cut back that like this, maybe even a bit harder, back to that pair of leaves there, and then we'll get new flushes of growth coming from there. So because we've done that there, what we'll do is a similar cut to a similar length on this one. Now we have no leaves there, so we're not guaranteed of getting new shoots from the end. It's likely, but not guaranteed, but we will get budding somewhere further back in. These side shoots down here are much more in keeping with that length. So what we'll do is we'll just cut back to those pairs of leaves. This larger leaf, what we'll do, once we get new flushes of growth coming through, we can come in and remove that at some point. But having that there will stimulate growth from the branch tip, which is where we want it to come from. So after pruning a little bit, the apex is basically the same sort of size as it was. Then there are some areas that we're looking to actively grow out. Okay, so for example, this branch down here. So what we've done is we've kept some of the spring growth and then cut back to the first leaf on these 2 shoots from the spring growth. And then after that, what we will see is another flush of growth from here that will then explode out there, and we're going to get 1, 2 flushes of growth within the year, and that way we can extend out and bifurcate, create branches where we want them to grow out and extend. Where we want to keep that same shape, we come in and we cut back essentially to where it started from. This is the tip of the cascading branch down here. Okay, if we just leave it just as it is and do nothing, then this will extend out a little bit, but there'll be no bifurcation, there'll be no extra branches develop on there. So what we would do is come in and just take the tips off there, and then from each of those 2 points we will get multiple shoots form and start to grow out. We can then thin those out, and as they're growing out we can pinch the tips again to stop them from extending off too far, and then to maybe even get 3rd flushes of growth. So that's the tree pruned. Now what we'll do is put just a few bits of wire on just to tidy up the shape and then leave it to grow. So after the application of a few pieces of wire just to tighten up the foliage pads and the removal of some of the larger leaves on the inside, we've now got our shape. So the next thing to do over the year, feed it, water it, wait for the new shoots to come out from the tips, and then look at thinning those out and stopping them if they extend off too long. Any second flush shoot pinching should be done before the end of August to ensure a decent crop of flowers the following year.
Okay, so that's sort of 2 types of sort of pruning there. You know, pruning back to the previous shape, and that type of maintenance type pruning, and then also pruning back and keeping a little bit of the new growth in order to sort of force out sort of secondary shoots coming from now. And so basically what you're kind of looking at in that sort of time is those bits that are kind of like growing out and then being cut back to shape. They're basically sort of taking 2 steps forward and then 2 steps backwards, so they're not actually going anywhere, so you're able to sort of maintain that shape. In doing so, inner growth will come out and it'll fill out, and it'll be a little bit more dense on the inside there, but it's that 2 steps forward and 2 steps back idea. On some of those lower branches that we were looking at developing out and elongating things in the spring, we let them take 2 steps forward and then just 1 step back, so we keep keeping some of that new foliage but just cutting it off to stimulate a second sort of flush of growth. The issue comes when a tree is going through that 2 steps forward and 2 steps back regime for too long. Okay, and so when that happens, when you're maintaining an azalea for over sort of a number of years, 3-4 years, so it grows out, we cut it back to shape, grow back, and from the inside we just keep getting more and more and more and more shoots sort of coming through. What happens is the lignification of the branch tips starts to occur. Okay, now what we need to try and imagine is that the branches are kind of like the arteries around your heart. Okay, when you're young and vigorous, they are working at full efficiency. Okay, they're just pumping and pumping and pumping. There's the whole capacity of the artery is sending blood where it needs to be. As you eat a few too many bacon sandwiches, as you get older, too much beer, too much fried food, etc., we start to get fuzziness on the arteries. The effective area of sort of blood transportation reduces, blood pressure rises, we end up with all sorts of problems. Okay, I use this analogy because most people in the bonsai world eat far too many bacon sandwiches and such like. So this is something that we can easily relate to. With azalea branches and with deciduous trees, and this is a concept we will revisit in a future stream and things like that, it's kind of that, but the opposite. Right? So we get a new shoot that comes out this year. Okay, we stop it, we cut it back. It starts to lignify. So it sends a little bit of wood on the inside. Okay, but it doesn't really get any bigger on the outside. Then over time, next year, does the same thing. Grows out, gets cut back. Starts to lignify more, starts to become twiggier and twiggier and twiggier. And so what was previously 100% efficient branch tip, all lovely and flexible, everything transporting water and nutrients, starting to lignify, starting to reduce in its sort of capacity. And the sort of the vigor of those branches deteriorates. Okay, so that when you're doing that 2 steps forward, 2 steps back approach, that starts to happen. Okay, so when we're looking at pruning and maintaining azaleas and keeping that sort of shape, have to go through and thin them out. Okay, the example you're going to see next looks very brutal, sort of hedge pruning sort of type of technique, which a lot of people, when they see it with azaleas, they think there's no skill to it. There isn't massive amounts of skill to that kind of initial kind of topiary approach. Where the skill point comes is in the thinning out, and I do sort of mention it. Okay, so we'll look at a tree with that idea in mind, and that sort of thinning out aspect is the essential part of the technique. Without that, the tree is just going to get older, lignified. The branch tips are going to reduce in efficiency. The tree is going to suffer. Okay, and when that happens, I've got an example of that. Okay, so here we go.
So this is a shohin sized AKEMI no TSUKI. Which is a lovely small leaf, compact growing variety, shohin size. We saw this on a previous stream. And what I'm going to do is go through and give it a light prune to stimulate second flush of growth, keep it compact and thin it out. So first we'll come through and just topiary to shape. So I'm imagining the outline of all of those foliage pads minus the new growth that's going to come out. So the new growth that will form from now will add an extra couple of centimetres all over. So I need to calculate for that. Okay, so we're kind of back to shape where we want to be. All around the tree. Gone in a little bit harder than other areas up in the top here. Maybe a little bit harder there. Some downward growing shoots on the inside. We'll get rid of those. Okay, so that's back to shape. Now we'll just go through and thin out any of those cluster areas, any woody lignified areas on the inside. And that's as much as we need to do. So I'm aiming to keep the same silhouette, the same shape, but just to reduce the number of woody lignified branches, cluster type growths on the inside that are coming through. Where we've got fresh new growth coming from the inside, we'll look to try and leave that. Where it's too long, we'll just cut back. It doesn't matter if there's any green or not. This tree is very, very strong and healthy. Cluster areas in here. Lots of growth all coming from one point. That needs to be thinned out. But after about 5-10 minutes of work, we've thinned it out back to that skeleton structure again. And now it's ready to put on a lot more meat.
And there it is. So in the chat, Ellie mentioned it says poodle cut, and to a certain extent it is. And I did say that whole kind of topiary-like effect is one of the reasons why the Satsuki world in Japan gets kind of ridiculed by the bonsai fraternity, because it does look as though you're just going in and doing a poodle cut or just doing topiary. But the important aspect to it is, and any good Satsuki grower will do this, is that going through and thinning out and making sure that there's space for new growth to keep coming, and the older lignified twigs are being removed in favour of new shoots, because you're going to constantly keep getting those new shoots coming.
Is disconnected.
That's very nice,
Bluetooth
bud.
is connected.
There we go. Because you're constantly getting that fresh new growth coming through, you're going to be able to maintain that shape, but it's always going to be with those youthful branches. Jerry asked in the chat about, is this applicable to other species? Yes, it is, particularly the deciduous trees. However, as I said, we will cover this in another stream. I've got like a PowerPoint presentation on the maintenance of highly refined trees. The time cycle of an azalea compared to, say, the time cycle of a maple. So with the maples, you keep pinching, you keep pinching, you keep pinching it, and those branch tips become lignified and vigour can drop down. It will happen, but the time cycle on maples and such like is over 10 to 15 years. With an azalea, 3 years, 4 years. So it really happens on a very sort of much higher sort of frequency. And so you grow them out, you cut them back hard, thin them out, and all you can, you just sort of keep doing this over a relatively short sort of cycle. Okay. So that's one of the kind of the important aspects of the pruning that we're doing at this time of year, the post-flowering pruning, both to redefine structure in trees, both to maintain the shape, and also to, maintain the vigor, the health and the vigor of the tree. Okay. So, just to answer a few questions before we go on to something else that came up. Ralph asked in the chat about wire. I forgot to mention at the time. The application of paper to wire. So, sort of wrapping the paper, wrapping the wire that you're going to apply with paper. I would only ever do this if I was going to use copper wire. So generally, we would only ever want to use aluminium wire, aluminum. For the Americans out there, to the azaleas, because the bark on them is very, very soft. I mentioned in one of the previous videos, previous streams, that this time of year isn't the greatest time of year to be sort of doing it, because there's so much moisture under the bark. Like that cambium layer is at its sort of fleshiest, and it's really easy to take the skin off, and so we don't want to be doing too much sort of heavy wiring. This sort of time of year. If you were going to, and particularly if you were going to start using 3mm, 4mm, no, not 3, but definitely sort of 4, 5, 6mm aluminium wire or bigger copper wire, then you would definitely be wanting to look at wrapping some paper around it to kind of take off some of the effect of the skinning of the branches, and also the burning of the branches, particularly when the canopy of foliage gets exposed. Okay, so if you are going to do that, then I would definitely wrap it in wire. But for the thinner stuff, there's no real need. Somebody asked about the how long will it take to grow out wire scars and burning scars and stuff like that. It takes a while. It definitely takes a while, so don't let it happen. I said in a previous one, and we mentioned it on the rock planting, if in doubt, just cut it off, start to grow it again. Okay, it's quite often the quickest and the easiest way. Or, as we saw with that straight branch on the rock planting, try and grow something out in front of it. Okay, so that's kind of the covering of pruning and such like. There's one other aspect of pruning that we need to sort of delve into, and this is a question that a lot of people ask, where we have multiple colour flowers, or something like a kinsai, which has a very sort of specific tassel-like flower, but when we start to see expressions of the kind of like the parent flower sort of coming through, and how we kind of deal with it. Okay, this is a really kind of difficult to sort of specify type of idea, because there's not a lot of research done into it, and the Japanese don't really kind of like know on a genetic level what's sort of happening, but in a practical level they do. So we'll just look at an example of it's not a kinsai, but something very similar related, where we have some issues with that, and then we'll talk a little bit about it after that. So if anybody has any questions, do ask those.
So this is a Sekimori no Sai, which is very similar to kinsai in the flower, but very different in the leaf type. So we have that similar explosion-like flower, which is similar to kinsai, although the petals are much more fleshy, larger on this one, on the Sekimori. And the leaves are much more sort of a lighter green, larger than the kinsai, which tends to be very dark green, very sharp and pointy. I'll get some pictures up for you to compare. However, as with all azaleas, there can be different types of flower occurring on the same tree. So we can start to see a little bit of the flowers beginning to get a bit fleshier, and the petals becoming wider here. And up in the top, there was some expression of one of the parents type flowers up in the top here. Okay, overall, this tree is very pure, apart from a couple up in the top there, except for this one branch here, which has turned entirely into that larger type of flower. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to remove that entire branch. We're going to need to check to see if it is going to miss this branch. Thankfully this is a back branch, so we'll look from the front to see if we can lose it, and then look at removing those areas where we have expressions of the larger flower. So that branch, which is entirely the large flower, exists round the back and comes from the trunk. We could lose that without any major gaps forming from the front. Okay. This tree was purchased on behalf of a client, and in consultation with him, he decided that he wanted to keep the flowers as pure as possible, and that we'll get rid of that branch. So the whole thing is going to come off. There was not a single flower on that branch which was coming out in the desired type of flower. Where this branch is, we have only a short distance between the next sort of set of branches that are growing, and so we don't have any sort of fear of dieback or any sort of desiccation of the live vein in there, so we can come in and remove this branch entirely. So what I'll do, just eat away at it. Now, having removed that branch, there is actually the possibility of creating this side as the front as well, which is one option. But what we need to do first is just to remove any of the other expressions of those larger flowers. So what we have here is 2 large flowers on this branch, but a thin petaled flower here. So we know that only this branch is expressing the larger flowers, whereas the neighbouring flowers were expressing the normal ones. And so there's no need to come in and take off that entire branch. So we have a situation here with a Kinsai that has 1 large trumpet-like flower and the 2 firework desirable tassel-like flowers. Now if we do the normal thing and say prune back the branches, then soon afterwards new foliage forms. Going through the year the flower buds develop, the foliage hardens off, and then the following year what we would tend to see is that same branch will have trumpet-like flowers and a neighbouring branch will start to develop them as well, and only this one single branch has the desirable type. Going forward, the influence spreads, and the following year, 2022, we'll start to see even more of the trumpet-like flowers. What do? Rather than just cut back and allow new growth to form off of that one trumpet branch, we cut the whole thing off entirely, and then the likelihood of keeping that tassel-like flower is much higher. It's not guaranteed, but it's much higher. Up in the top here, we have this one branch showing the larger flower. So there's no other obvious flowers on there. There's not a whole lot on there. So we'll just take off the entire branch all the way from the base. There's plenty of other branches up in the top to fill in. Other than those 2 areas, we couldn't really find any other obvious larger leaf areas. So now all we need to do is remove the flowers and the seed pods over the entire tree, and what we're going to do is we're going to leave as much of the green on there as possible. This tree was only freshly imported when it came in, it hardly had anything on it. We're just letting it grow out and become strong and healthy. So we just remove the flowers, maybe do a little bit of pruning for style, but then that's it.
Sorry, I was so amazed at my incredible diagram and animation that I was just blown away by my own skill. So yeah, apologies for the very schoolboy-like drawing, but it kind of does explain kind of the concepts behind them. Now, I will say that I'm not kind of like massively knowledgeable about the genetics of it. It seems as though not the geneticists aren't massively kind of like aware of what's happening. But the one thing that I do know is that the kind of the flowering, the flower colours and the flower expressions are dependent upon several factors. One of them is the genetics of the tree, and that is determined by the breeding. So when they develop a new sport, when they develop a new crossbreed from seed and such like, what they're looking at is, taking the DNA of 2 different varieties and sort of crossing them together, and then the new variety has a certain genetic code. Now, every single cutting from that tree will have the same genetic code. However, once that tree starts to grow, genes get turned on and turned off. Okay, so the gene to flower with the big trumpet-like flower gets turned on for some reason. Okay, what that reason is, I don't know. Okay, the factors that will change the colours of multiple coloured flowers trees. So, for example, this one here, this one is a Juko. This has sort of purpley pink, a light pink, going down to whitish colour flowers. Now, what makes those happen in sort of greater or lesser varieties is the level of sort of 3 different factors, secondary metabolites, and these are things such as chlorophyll, carotenoids, and flavonoids. Okay, the effect of the first 2 isn't massively known. Sort of how they affect the flowering types, but the flavonoid, which is a type of, as I said, metabolite within the tree, how that affects the flowering is kind of like well sort of studied and documented in a lot of other varieties of flowers, not necessarily azaleas. And basically, once the kind of the genes and the flavonoids for the expression of one sort of type of flower start to be present, it then sort of starts to spread to branches further back. There's a build up of these compounds. And the reason why it builds up is due to things such as the pH within the tree, the type of fertilizer that's being given, the amount of sunlight that's on the tree, and things like this. And so it's this real kind of sort of slow but year-on-year progressive effect of the turning on and the turning off of certain genetic parts within the tree. If there is anybody out there who can explain this better than I am, who's a plant geneticist and has a real deep understanding of how this works, then let me know. But the way that I kind of like look at it is that if your car is broken down on the side of the road, do you want a physicist who can come along and draw you a diagram of the ideal Otto cycle, which is to do with the compression rates and all this kind of stuff for the internal combustion engine, or do you want a mechanic who's going to get you on your way? Right? So you don't necessarily need to understand all the genetic things that are affecting it. You just need to know how to kind of deal with the situation. And one of the ways of dealing it with the Kinsai or the Sekimori is to remove that, to stop that influence from spreading, to stop those genes from being turned on in the neighbouring branches. It may be the case that in the UK, in the northern European climate where there's there's less sunlight, those genes just keep getting turned on. The reason why they get turned on and off is partially due to the desire to reproduce. So, these are some of the things that affect other flowering species and other flowering varieties, and so that could be a major factor. How we fertilize them can have a different effect, and I don't know the answers. All I'm doing is sort of just seeing how other people are operating, seeing how other people's trees are developing over time, and just making best guesses, and that's all we can kind of do. Okay, so far this one has been very, very well behaved. We've got a really good kind of distribution of the different colours, and whenever you've got things that are pink, reddish pink, and things and white, it'll always be the case that the red will start to dominate. Okay, it's one of those kind of recessive genes. The white flower is the absence of red. Okay, and so as opposed to the red flower being an absence of white is basically the idea. And so the red will always start to kind of dominate. So when you have on a branch something which is really starting to dominate with red, you want to be sort of pruning that back harder and harder and harder, because otherwise that influence, those genes will start getting turned on further and further up within that branch. However, and I was discussing this with an American customer who had a Kinsai that was going to its very sort of trumpet-like flower, you have to make a decision, you have to make a judgment call on how obsessed about the purity of the flowers are you. What is more important, the 48 weeks of the year where it's not in flower and you're looking at the structure of the tree, or the 4 weeks when it is in flower? Right, and so you're going to have to make a judgment call as to what is very important. Now, in the West, we don't have any sort of Satsuki exhibitions where people are being judged on the purity of their flowers. The only person who's judging anybody on the purity of their flowers is me, and that's my problem. I have to deal with it. However, if you want to try and maintain that, then you have to start looking at those ideas and start thinking about it from that perspective, and looking at balancing up the colours and such like within branches, the flower types within branches. However, no matter what you do, because of climatic conditions, because of horticultural practices and things like that, it might just be kind of like a losing battle, and it's just going to happen. Right, so if that is the sort of the case, then just look at the structure of the tree and look at really kind of like maintaining the structure. So, you know, I'm for this tree kind of like real focusing on the structure. With this one, because there was only that slight infection, that slight kind of like crossover of the sort of the two different flowers, it was worth having a go at trying to maintain its purity. If next year a third of the tree comes out with the bigger flowers, it's just like, you know, let's just concentrate on how it looks for the rest of the year. Okay, so there is a very kind of interesting article about this, which I'm going to put in the chat, and I'll put this up in the Discord group as well. Let's make sure I press the right buttons and I don't turn off the stream. Here it comes. There we go. And if you just kind of like look into the kind of like the genetics of flowers and things like that, it's quite an interesting little area, and people don't know a whole lot about it. They're only just kind of getting into in the horticultural trade about the kind of the genetic actually kind of going in and changing the genes within plants, as opposed to what's been happening since the 1600s, whereby plantsmen have been doing it through selective breeding and through techniques and trying to figure it out in a more kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Just through experiments. Okay, just by doing it. Okay, so that's kind of like all the advice I can kind of give regarding that. Hold back the red where possible, but not to the point whereby you're going to destroy the structure of the tree. And then just keep an eye on the kind of like the fertilization regime that you're doing. Trying to giving it as much sun, trying to kind of recreate that kind of Japanese environment as much as possible. So trying to get as much sun onto it as possible, high humidity, letting them grow, letting them stay healthy, and all this kind of things like this. Because the less sun that they get, the weaker the colour of the flowers comes through. So keeping them in the shade too much, particularly when it comes up to flowering time, you're going to get weak coloured flowers. If you then take them in, put the trees into the sun, you can see this increase in the intensity of the flower, because the chlorophyll kind of is increased, and all of the other metabolites which affect the colours of the flowers increases. So it's going to be one of those things you just have to try to kind of like figure out kind of as you go along. But that's those are the kind of the basic principles behind it. One of the questions in the chat was about fertilizing. Azaleas do like to be fertilized well. I would be fertilizing. The only time you want to be sort of holding back on the fertilizer is just before we come sort of coming into flower. So I would not be applying too much fertilizer in May, because otherwise you could then the flower, particularly if you're going to go to exhibition, because then the flowers could be too large, the flowers could be too quickly. It could be putting too much effort into vegetative growth and such like. Okay, so other than that, I'm not sure really kind of like, other than giving more examples about it, it's kind of like difficult to say what else to do. So the other thing that a lot of people have been kind of like asking questions about sort of directly to me, and I've experienced, is what to do when trees start to go downhill. Well, one of the main things to do is to try and figure out why the tree started to go downhill, the azaleas started to go downhill. And invariably it's either got something to do with the roots or something to do with the way in which it's been pruned. Okay, so it's either been badly repotted and the roots have been attacked in the wrong way. So sort of going in and digging around directly underneath the trunk is always a kind of a dangerous thing to do, and can seriously sort of deteriorate the vigour of the tree. And not pruning it hard enough on a regular basis to rejuvenate the branch tips is another reason why things happen. When the vigour of trees does start to go down, with azaleas it can often be the case of, like, once it goes past a certain point, it's just worth giving up on. It's just put it in the ground, maybe let it try and become a garden tree, or just set it free, because they are very, very difficult to kind of bring back. maples, other trees, you know, you can work with the dead wood, you can do something and try and rejuvenate them, but azaleas, it can be very, very difficult. Here we're going to look at oh, I don't have the video. Oh Jesus, I've not loaded up the video. I hope it's on there. Sorry, we were getting so far, but no. Yes, we do have it. Sorry, just 1 second. Let me just load up this video. I was doing so well there. We're going to look at how to kind of work with a tree which is failing, and basically it's all about kind of trying to protect the live vein from deteriorating even further. And where are we? No. Oh God, sorry. Browse. Satsuki rock. Failing tree. Okay. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. Basically about protecting the live vein from desiccating and deteriorating any further, and then just looking at reducing kind of demand on the roots and such like. Okay.
So here we have a tree which is in need of some resuscitation. This is a customer's tree. This was brought to me to try and save. If you look, there are a lot of dead branches, and you can see the cracking of the wood. The live vein is very desiccated. We have dead branches and dying branches. There's no vigour, there's no life in this tree at all. It was repotted a couple of years ago, but we have a lot of weeds growing in the soil surface, which isn't going to help, and we've got to try and rejuvenate this. So what do? First off, we're going to take all of the flowers and the ones which are just about ready to come out. So we'll take those off first, and then we'll look at how we can protect the live vein. So now that's done, what we'll look at doing is removing some unwanted branches, unnecessary branches. So for example, from this one point here, we've got 1, 2, 3, all sort of coming from the same point. This one we definitely don't need, so we can get rid of that. This one is very, very weak, as most of the branches on the tree are, and that's also coming from a position where we don't want it. So we're going to reduce the demand on the tree. And then look for branches such as this one here, which kind of comes up and then back across on itself. Something like that. We can get rid of that one. Now those branches have been removed and all the wounds sealed, what we'll do is we'll remove all of these weeds that we can, and then we'll look at protecting the live vein. This type of liverwort that we see here, this kind of fleshy, slimy, mouldy, squishy looking weed, is a sign of excess water. Okay, so we know that there's maybe been too much water going onto this tree, particularly because it's not been taking it up. So we need to make sure we get all of the weeds out, including their roots, and then also look to ensure that there isn't any compacted soil in and around the nabari, and that water can penetrate through to the core of the root ball, which it can do. So I don't feel as though the problem is particularly with the compactness of the roots or anything like that. The problem has come from the top of the tree. So this is all dead trunk. You can see that the bark is flaking off, and the roots that are associated with that area are also dead. So we can look at really being quite aggressive in cleaning this area out. Decompose that soil has become around there. But it's not, it doesn't smell. So it's not rotting or causing any sort of issues in that sense. It's still oxygenated. There's just decomposing organic matter in there, so the roots that were previously alive. So you can see the amount of crap that we've removed. We've got some holes down into the core in there. And we've got a lot of live roots in this area. Okay, so the live vein of the trunk sort of comes down here. It's being fed by these types of roots. This could be a clue as to what happened in the past. The front of the pot just gets watered. Those roots have moisture, supply that live vein. Around the back of the tree didn't get watered, though they died off. Is one possibility, not for certain. Okay, so we know that the live vein is going to sort of come up, kind of potentially go around there. See all this cracking. This is all dead wood. Up here, you can see old wounds, completely dried out. But we've got this living branch, so we can sort of see that. You can almost see that line going down there. So that's where I'm guessing the live vein kind of goes. And then that goes up into the top of the tree somewhere there. So I'm not going to bother going in and trying to define where the live vein is or anything like that. It's not really going to do us too much good. But what we are going to need to do is get some protection on there. So we'll get some sphagnum moss and a towel or something like that. Just by sort of uncovering some of the, taking some of the bark off, we discovered just a very, very fine live vein along there. So that's the only area that we need to put any sphagnum moss on. So this is just going to be rough, uncut sphagnum moss, which is moist. Just place it loosely over the base there, and then work our way up, wrapping around with a bandage or a towel or something like that to keep it in position. So that's the lower section protected. Then from here and above, what we can just do is try and wrap it in a towel. Just have to be very careful going in and out of the branches. We can put a little bit of sphagnum moss in and around, just to keep a little bit of extra moisture in there. And then what we can do is just drape that over the top there to stop that sphagnum moss from being taken or getting washed away. Okay, so it looks all ugly as hell, but it's going to keep the tiny live vein that it does have moist and stop any more desiccation. Then it's just up to the tree to see if what foliage it does have can photosynthesize enough to generate some energy to strengthen the live vein and to then strengthen the roots and to keep growing.
So there's the poor unfortunate patient. As I said, will it help? It's going to give it more of a chance than not doing it. So one of the real important things, as I've said from the initial kind of styling thing, is that thinking about the integrity of that live vein, making sure that it doesn't dry out, making sure that it doesn't desiccate, because the bark is so thin. Once it starts to dry out, then the azaleas don't have that sort of capability to recover from it, because they're not designed to be big thick trunk trees like this. They're designed to be shoots, lots and lots of shoots sort of coming through it. And so this artificial way in which they're built for bonsai does leave it with some serious issues, that when stress occurs. Okay, so keeping it out of the sun is a very important thing. The one thing that didn't get mentioned in the video is that it's very important to keep the towel, to keep that sphagnum moist, because if you don't, what can actually happen is it can actually sort of wick moisture out of the trunk and exacerbate the problem. So it's very important to sort of keep it very moist going forward. Now, one of the reasons that all that liverwort and the soil had become so bad, and the kind of the health of the tree had deteriorated, is because of that balance between the oxygen and water levels within the soil. And so trying to get, like, going forward, what we're going to be sort of looking at doing is making sure that it's not too wet. Okay, that's one of the key things. There is very little kind of transpiration. There is very little moisture sort of being taken up from the roots and going out of the foliage, and so we don't need to be constantly watering it, thinking that we are going to be helping it. Trees will often get killed by kindness, so making sure that we do ensure that the soil is allowed to be oxygenated, making sure that there's fresh air within the soil is a key thing to do, which is why cleaning all of that surface away was one of the key things to helping it. So going, like, what we'll be doing with the aftercare of this is putting it somewhere where it's not going to get rained on constantly, if we can, ideally in a polytunnel, and making sure it's moist, and making sure that we're misting the top as much as possible, just to try and get some growth. Now, if we came in and just cut through all of those older lignified branches, there is a chance that it may send out secondary growth, but there is also a chance that it won't. So what I would do is just give it 1 year, just give it the rest of this year to see if it's going to try and push any sort of new extensions. If it does, then we'll start to work with those. If not, just go in. The only other thing we can do is just to go in and just cut all of the green off, and just see how it responds. It's going to do one of two things. It's either going to respond well or it's going to die. But that's unfortunately kind of like the level where we're getting to. It's still hope for it. We're going to do everything that we can in order to kind of make sure that it can push through. Not watering it too much in the pot, not giving it any feed, not letting it dry out, misting the top, all those kind of things. That's about as much as we can do. Okay, so when you have an azalea which is deteriorating like that, this is pretty much all you can do. I wouldn't go in and repot until it starts to get healthy, because then what you're asking it to do is to grow on top and below. Right. The key thing, this is in a bonsai pot. It was repotted a couple of years back by myself. That wasn't the reason why it was deteriorating. It was already on its way down, and we should be able to manage that level of moisture and oxygen within the soil from what we've just done. So I would only go to repot it once it's kind of regained in health. Okay, so the only other thing to sort of really cover, apart from before going on to some common sort of pests and diseases, was the question from where was it? From Graham Jenkins. And I am assuming that you're referring to the Sekimori no Mai. No Sai, sorry. Yes, the pot, the rock planting is a little bit on the shallow side. Did mention in the first videos that azaleas don't like being on rocks and such like. So what we've done here is a similar thing to the real sick one. Covering the base of the roots with some very loose sphagnum moss. Okay, that will help with the to kind of regain some strength, some energy. And then what we could look at doing next year is perhaps changing the because it's planted in very coarse soil, very large particle soil. So we could look at shifting down to a sort of slightly smaller grade soil to retain a little bit more moisture. Maybe just lifting it up a little bit, getting a little bit more soil in there, but we should be okay to kind of like maintain it in a relatively shallow pot, as long as we don't let it dry out during the summer. Make sure it's kind of like watered. So there are a couple of things that you can do to increase the water retention and the health there. Okay, but putting it into a slightly deeper pot would definitely help with the vigor going forward. Okay, right, so the only other thing just to talk about is some common pests and diseases of azaleas that I have experienced around here. To be honest, there's not a whole lot. In Japan, they are one of the worst affected varieties for what they call dani. in Japan, and that's not some irritating little child. It is the word for mites, and there's all sorts of different leaf mites and such like that come on it, and they can sort of decimate a tree in a very sort of short period of time. The only sort of mites that we tend to see here are red spider mites, and they can sort of cause some of the black spots that you may see on the leaves, tiny little black spots on the undersides, and such like, in a general kind of like deterioration in vigor. So one of the best ways to not get that is to, when you're watering and you're kind of like looking at misting the top or watering the top of the tree, do it from underneath. So with your hose pipe, go in from underneath, spray the underside of the foliage, because the spider mites don't like that. And if you are noticing anything, then coming in with perhaps a preventative contact pesticide. Not preventative, because that would be responding to them there. Yeah, so if you do see them, a contact pesticide would be a good idea. However, you have to understand the life cycle of them, so you're going to need to spray 2 or 3 times within a period of 2 or 3 weeks, because the life cycle of them is very, very sort of short. So they'll be, you could spray 1 week, just kill the adults, but the eggs remain on the leaves. Then they hatch, they manage to then make some babies and stuff like, and so the cycle continues. So sort of spraying them sort of on a couple of times is always good. However, I would only recommend that if you have a severe infestation. Generally, I don't seem to see that problems at all, just because just sort of using a good organic fertilizing regime, as previously described, I don't sort of tend to see those issues at all. The only thing that I see a lot of is leaf gall, fungal leaf gall. I've got some pictures to sort of highlight that. This is a tree that I have here, which basically infested everything else. This is a Hoshino Kagayaki, which is, there it is, I should have started off with that picture, purple flowers, but is renowned for getting leaf gall issues. And leaf gall is basically a kind of a fungal disease where you get these really awful misshapen leaves. It's caused by a fungus which spreads around in the air, and is pretty ugly looking, but not seriously damaging to the health of the tree. So I don't know what this was. Looking at removing some branches. Yeah, there we go. Just skip through that. Older branches, etc. But yeah, the leaf gall is the one of the biggest issues. I will just put a link up to some other pictures of that and such like. Now, realistically, the best thing to try and do is just to remove those leaves as they form and try and be hygienic as much as possible, because once you get once you kind of get it, and it gets to that point whereby you're getting all that white sort of hairiness on it, they're the spores, and they then go and reinfect other trees around you and such like. So when you start to see it, go in and cut those leaves out as much as possible, and just generally keep the health of the tree up, and you'll be able to kind of like grow through it. As I said, azaleas will kind of keep sort of budding back, so you just have to put that extra little bit of effort into the rejuvenation process. Okay, so just keep going and keep pushing them. Other than that, I've never really kind of experienced too many issues other than self-inflicted ones through bad watering, or excessive or lack of fertilizing, and aggressive repotting and things like that. Those are the main kind of issues that you tend to see. In the United States, you will get all sorts of other issues. One of the things that I have seen quite a bit of, and you do get it over here to a certain extent, is thrips or leaf gall midges. And when you start to see this kind of really weird, grotesque growth formations on the sort of the new spring growth, so this will have been a shoot that has developed. Actually, no, this developed last. That to that extent it developed the previous year. But what you do tend to see it on the spring growth. It's basically whereby so it's quite a big bit there, a leaf gall midge or a similar sort of sucking insect gets into the tip of the growing shoot and starts to attack it, and there's basically just a reaction to that, and it just sends out this kind of like big ugly cluster of shoots like that, and I basically just kind of remove that, throw it away. And if it's starting to happen more and more frequently, then you've got them in the area, and you're going to have to look at sort of preventative spraying over the winter. So sort of thinking about lime sulfur winter washes, and then preventative pesticide spraying when those new leaves, those new shoots are just starting to come out and they're easy to attack. But there are all sorts of different bugs and pests and diseases in the warmer climates and things like that. But it's really quite easy to find out information online, because rhododendrons are a widely used species in landscapes and such like that. So there's always a lot of information to be found elsewhere. Right, it's gone past 10:30. We've ploughed on, so we're going to call it a night now. Any other questions that didn't get answered, you could send me an email or something, or we'll try and get them covered again. I don't know if we will do another Satsuki stream. I've got one more sort of big piece of work to do on a tree, but it's pretty much kind of covering what we've already done, so I might just knock that on the head and do something else. There will be a stream on Saturday night, again, 9 PM, as per usual. Subject to be decided. I've got the interview with Akiyama, my senpai, is hanging over my head like a very heavy weight, so I'm going to try and get onto that. And there's other summer work that we sort of need to be doing. As I said right at the start, these streams are free. If you have found it very useful, then please consider donating. This was a massive brain dump of Satsuki information, and I hope it was of benefit to you. As I said, there's a lot of information that you can transpose to different species, different ideas, different concepts. But if you have found it useful, follow the donation link either in the text below or the chat or whatever, or just get in contact some way. Subscribe, like, all that kind of jazz. Those people who do donate get to join this sort of Discord group, which is basically a big chat room, kind of forum-y type thing, which some people have been very sort of generous with their information sharing. So it's not just me answering questions. There's a lot of peer-to-peer type of information sharing, which is great. So thank you all to those people who are doing it. If you have donated and you haven't got any email contact from me, then please find a way of getting in contact, because there are a few people who have sort of fallen through gaps and such like. So apologies, I'm not massively technologically advanced, as you can tell from the streams and what have you, but we're trying. So the only thing left to say is, and this will be a surprise to some of you, and I do actually have a specific beer can. There we go. Boom. Set up specifically for the beer. Tonight we are bringing the stream in association with alcohol-free beer. It's all we had left in the house. But yeah, Brewdog Nanny State. If you're going to go off the alcohol, this is a phenomenally tasty beer. Cheers. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Thank you.